to the racks every week. Keep craving that rush that you get when you flip to the next page. Life is better when you live in between Wednesdays. Yes, got a massive back.
What's up, folks? I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and I'm joined today by Meaghan Carter, and we're going to talk about a variety of their work. So, Meaghan, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. A little bit of context for the folks out there in YouTube land. So originally we first met at TCAF last year. Oh, I forget the month. It was later August or something.
June.
Oh God, it was June. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And in June there, you had a table set up. You had a variety of work there. I myself picked up Godslave Volume 1. Which is, if I'm not mistaken, the first 3 chapters of the webcomic, correct?
That is correct.
Perfect. So, people have now seen your work. For the folks at home who have never heard your name, never seen your face, who is Meaghan Carter?
I am a Toronto-based comic artist. I'm big about aggressive female leads, urban fantasy, and supernatural partnerships, and that is just filthy in my work and wherever I go.
Awesome. And when and how did you start getting into comics? I always like to hear people's stories about this.
Do you mean making comics or reading comics?
Go for both. Whatever you feel is important.
Sure. So I grew up in that the 2000 aughts era of the manga boom. And so that was very informal to my work. I just devoured a manga as it was coming out to like Indigo and Chapters and the local mall. And it kind of grew from there. And also like web comics. I started reading stuff like Mega Tokyo and PvP as that was starting to get more popular. But in high school, I was originally, my dream was to become an animator. I was like,
okay.
I couldn't be a comic artist. They have to draw everything. You have to learn how to draw everything. And I just want to draw cool characters. And so I'm just going to be an animator. And then I went to art school and I had a teacher convince me that's like, you seem like you like to draw your own stories a lot. You know, and the thing is, I'd been drawing comics in high school. I'd been drawing like this Ghost Hunter comic, and I was drawing journal comics, but I was convinced, no, I'm going to be an animator. I don't know what the separation was there, but then I had a teacher when I was in college saying, like, you seem like you like to draw your own stories and draw your own characters. I feel like you would be much happier drawing comics. And being a very impressionable 18-year-old, I was like, okay. And then just haven't looked back since.
Awesome. No, that's super cool. Were you also, I'm curious, because like you said, it's animation is what you wanted to go into. Were you also a big fan of like anime, like Studio Ghibli and the films that were coming out as well as the shows?
Oh my God, I'm a huge weeb. Yeah, Studio Ghibli was big. In the era, I'm going to date myself here, the era that I was growing up, it was that like trying to find the terrible subtitled streams of like Inuyasha or Angel Sanctuary. Yeah, I was very much an anime fan girl.
Nice. Now, were the subs you were trying to find, were those the ones where it was clearly fan done from someone in Japan or someone here who knew how to speak Japan, and so as it was coming out, they would dub it and then release it?
I don't know the specifics. There's this one voice actor YouTuber Sungwon who does a like parody of fan subs versus like official subs, where fan subs will, like, original subs will be like, you are my friend and we are going to pursue this goal together, and then the fan subs will be like, you I don't know if you like cussing on here.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's like, you are my fucking guy, you are my fucking Tomodachi, and we will pursue the Setsuna together. So like that's kind of the variation that I saw growing up, where it's just fans doing their best because they love it.
See, I always found that fascinating. obviously, you know, anime coming from mostly Japan. When it gets over here, yeah, it is normally through a publication house where they do their whole thing with voice actors and dubbing and subtitles and all that fun stuff. Um, but yeah, I always remember the online stuff where just hardcore fans would be like, screw it, we want to get this out. We have the Japanese, we can do this. It was just so cool.
It was kind of like the Wild West of streaming. There's no gatekeeping, and you were always just so like glad to get whatever you could get your paws on, or whatever could load on your terrible dial-up. And now, oh my God, just like the kids are
Yeah.
overloaded with anime content. They've got it so good.
Oh, there's Funimation, there's Crunchyroll, which is going to become its own thing. But yeah, no, there's so much now, which is great because, like, you know, I love being able to go watch whatever I want. I think the last one I watched was the Ranking of Kings with Little Boji, which just
I'm not super familiar. The one I have to catch up on right now is Mob Psycho.
oh, okay.
Yeah, they just finished up their third and final season. I've read the manga and I'm not emotionally ready to watch the end of the anime.
You'll be okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good times. I know that feeling though. I have a friend actually who wants me to watch A Silent Voice, and
Mm.
I'm not sure if I'm up for it because just from my understanding, it's about like massive bullying that happened to a girl, and it ended up
Oh
making her
no.
deaf. Um, yeah, and like the movie then jumps forward to when these kids are like 10 or 15 years older, and the repercussions of all that. And I'm just like, oh, I'm not ready to just cry.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but yeah, so we're here to talk about your comics.
Mm-mm.
So when we spoke, you said that God Slave was the start, the where to start with your work. Um, Given it's been 6 months or so, I like to ask, would you still say that God Slave is where people should start with your work?
Absolutely. I mean, Godslave is still the series that I'm working on, and it is the space that I've had a lot of, I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of different projects and try a lot of different things, but Godslave is so wholly my interest and what I love doing. It is, I talked earlier about aggressive female leads and growing up with manga, and supernatural partnerships, and it is just wholly that. And so, if you're wondering what does Meaghan like and what is Meaghan like doing, that's it. That's the answer.
Perfect. And for the folks at home, um, who might after this follow the links down below to go read it online or maybe order a copy like myself I have. What is God Slave about?
So, Godslave is about a girl tricked into working for a god claiming to be Anubis. If you're into Egyptian mythology, it is all about the pantheon family drama of like the big gods like Horus, Osiris, Set, Anubis, all of that stuff. It's got a lot of monster fights, it's got a lot of character drama, and all the things I mentioned as well. It's the comic where I taught myself how to draw action and fight scenes. And
Oh,
so
okay.
that is very much present in it as well.
Interesting. So I guess my next question is, what can you tell us about her? Who is she? What's her name? What's her deal?
Who is she? So that's Edith. And when the comic starts, Edith is taking a break from university. She's not really sure what to do with her life. She's not sure where she belongs or what she's meant to do. And so she's at this very vulnerable place when the comic starts, and when she meets this god who has this great purpose for her. At first, she's like, I don't know if this is for me, but as she starts working for him, getting into these monster fights, fighting different servants of God, she's like, oh, I kind of enjoy this and I'm kind of good at it. But then the greater ramifications of like, you're working among gods, you're working among monsters. Very quickly, her life starts to spin out of like her control. And so as much as she's enjoying it, she's losing more and more control of her life, and what she's able to do with it on her own. And so that's really like her struggle, where she's trying to find her place in the universe, and she looks to this god to create that. But the question is, at what cost?
Absolutely. One thing I really enjoyed about Edith too is, like you said, when we first meet her, she's taking a break. She's just kind of feeling out what's going on in her life. She's trying to figure stuff out. She goes to the museum and she feels just, I guess, tired, a little confused, a little lost, but definitely tired. And for me personally, there's always something about a protagonist, maybe not a hero, but a protagonist, where maybe they're not the smartest, they're not in the best of ways right now, they're tired, they're trying to figure something out. And I always get drawn to that. So I really like that about Edith. I also like that you very quickly threw her into basically a brawl and she kicked ass. It was so cool. I love the way I took it, and correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm actually going to show a little bit here.
Yeah.
Oh, her roommate, by the way. Gold.
Oh, people love Alma. It's so funny. Obviously I love writing her, and I love getting to draw her, but people love Alma. It's so wonderful.
Yes, she's amazing. So really quickly early on, this creature, this gentleman, comes in and pursues Edith, basically trying to get this little guy. I took it that person is, like, for me, mentally, I went to Full Metal, where you've got the homunculus who are all able to cover themselves in armor. That's what my brain interpreted, so that it's got this hard shell, and she ends up fighting this creature covered in black and armor. Can you explain a little bit about what that thing is?
Yes. So I did a lot of research about Egyptian mythology and Egyptology for this comic. And the followers, so that is a follower of Horus. They're called blacksmiths. And back in the day, legends about Horus, they make reference to the blacksmiths. And I think they were a group of people who kind of were acclimated to like iron weapons very quickly. And so they are my play on that, these like ancient followers of Horus. But I have turned that into, now they are the living weapon. And so they are not only able to cover themselves in this like iron material to protect themselves, they're also able to like, create weapons with their body.
I love it. That's super cool. I guess I am really curious when when you're doing your research, is it a lot of Googling? Are you making trips to libraries? What's your go-to, and maybe what's some of the interesting stuff that you've found that either you personally found fascinating, or that appears later in the book, or rather, because I don't want to give spoilers away. Yeah, start with stuff that you found that, one, how are you getting your research done, and what did you find interesting?
Yeah, so we're very lucky to live in a metropolis like Toronto, which has things like major reference libraries of books that are out of print, and a huge museum with its own library completely dedicated to Asia and Egypt as well. So when I first started researching for Godslave, I started with the internet, but that got me only like so far. I would make references to books and things at large that just weren't available with Google or with Wikipedia with what I had. And so I started moving on to the reference library. I found some books there. I found the ROM had its own library that's, I think, mainly used for university students. And that became a huge resource. I sat in on a mythology class at the University of Toronto. And I mean, Godslave is really just filled with like, here's the coolest thing I found out about Egyptian mythology. One of the big things, the first things I found out was that the names that we know the gods by are not their real names. They're like Greek
Oh.
translations of their names. And so Osiris, his real name is Osir. Isis, her real name is Aset. Ra is called Ra. They didn't really need to do very much. One of the other really cool things I found that isn't like a huge spoiler, but it does come up later on was that so Ra, he rides this sun boat. That they felt like the sun was this boat that would travel across the sky, and then at night it would go through the underworld. And so he rides this boat, but Ra is also the personification of the sun. And so for each phase of the sun, he is a different phase of himself.
Oh.
So when he's going through the underworld, he's called Off, like AUF Ray or Off Ra, and it means corpse Ra. And so he's just a corpse as he's riding through the underworld. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard of.
Yeah.
Just the idea of this zombie god going through the underworld on his big fancy boat. And so that's like just a kiss of like the stuff I was able to find out.
That's amazing. I'm personally curious now. Obviously, like the Toronto Reference Library, you can go downtown, you get your library card, you go in, enjoy. It's just a big library. It's a really cool library, but it's just a big library. The library at the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum, how does one go about getting access to that? Like, how do you do that?
It's both harder and easier than it sounds. I can't remember specifically how I even stumbled upon it. I think I was trying to look up things about like the university and like references, and I found mention of like the ROM library. The entrance is like around the side of the building, the ROM being the Royal Ontario Museum. And it has its own separate entrance, so it's not the public entrance. You go around a different way. And I just went in. And again, I think it's mainly made for like university students, but I said, I'm here to do some research. And I was very genuine and upfront, like, I'm not a student, but they're like, okay, but it is a private library. And so they gave me a number, I checked in, and then I was just able to sit there for like the day going through their books, and was like just a wealth of knowledge. And the smell there, just old book smell, oh, it was perfect.
Some of the books that you're able to read, like, were they recent prints of historical? So they were like old.
Yes, old enough that some of them were not super politically correct. Like very white depictions of like the gods. But yeah, like they're meant to be like, it's this private library. It's not super open to the public, so it's a lot of stuff that's out of print, really old printing.
Fascinating. That is so cool. And you must have had a lot of fun be able to go in there and check that all out. I have to ask that because clearly you know what you're doing. You know how to research. Based on what I've read of Godslave, you know what you're doing when you're making comics. You've gone to art school for it as well. How online? I understand currently there's nine chapters released, I believe.
6 chapters.
6 chapters. Okay. Yeah. So there's this one. There's a companion to this, and now you're working on what will eventually become volume 3.
Volume 2.
Oh, okay, volume 2. Oh, okay. So then I guess this is just a fun question I like to ask when there's good books. How much script-wise, how much farther ahead are you compared to drawing? Or do you like write the script, draw the page, write the script, draw the page?
So I hate scripting.
Fair.
I also there are some artists who just do loads and loads of concept art for their comics or their projects. I also hate concept art. I just want to make the comic. And so and here's the thing, I would be much better off if I just did concept art and I did the scripting. It would be so much better if I did that, but I don't enjoy doing it. And because it's just me working on the book, I don't have to answer to a publisher or an editor. So it's just me
Yeah.
who has to live with these problems. But I have a rough idea of like A to B to C. Like I know what needs to happen each chapter. I know what needs to happen in the series and what like kind of arc the characters have to go through. As far as like scene to scene, it's very by the seat of my pants.
Okay, so you're basically overall you've got the large concepts, but the nitty gritty stuff that'll come up when you're actually in there drawing it.
Yeah, and like sometimes it bites me, but
Fair.
it lends itself to like I can change my mind on the fly. Like, oh, I just had a really great idea, and I think I can work this into it, and I get to run into these kind of like happy accidents
Mhm.
with characters and storylines. Like, there's the character Chen, who is a
Yeah.
blacksmith, who I really just planned to be a one-off character, but not only did I have so much fun writing him, but the audience also like, oh, this guy rocks. And I was like, okay, this is going to be a recurring character because we are both on the same page here. And I never would have expected that.
Awesome. You know what? I definitely agree. If correct me if I'm wrong, Chen is the blacksmith. So they're when you see them in human form, they're full bodied suits and everything. Like not 3 piece, 2 piece suits, tie,
Yes.
glasses. And Chen is the one who works with. He's got a female companion, correct? And they
Yes.
kind of I my quickest summary for the folks out there is they're kind of like Team Rocket from Pokemon, where they play themselves very seriously, but they're a little bit goofy, but also like they will throw you through a wall. Um, yeah, they're great.
I have a lot of fun writing them. I'm a sucker for like easily irritated people, I like characters. But like they also they're the antagonists to Edith, but they're also convinced like they are on the side of good, like they're trying to stop the bad guy. And I like writing from that place. I think also from the very beginning I was like I want to write them like shitty high schoolers. So it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Um, so I think I'll have one last question, then I want to get how people can get the book. How long have you been creating Godslave now?
Since so I started researching and writing Godslave in the middle of my first webcomic takeoff. And that was about a year and a half before Godslave launched. And Godslave launched late 2014, like November 1st. And so I've been writing it since like 2012. I didn't
Okay.
really think it was had been that long until I found the like old sketches. I was like, oh, this is quite ancient at this in like webcomic age. It feels ancient, but
Yeah, because I find webcomics, they tend to move pretty darn quick. There's also a ton of them out there. I and I'm first to admit this. I'm a print media person. I love my books. So I find for me, webcomics isn't something I have my eye on. I don't know what's hot right now. I don't know what's out there. I don't know where even I would go to get it other than to Google, webcomics. Um, so yeah, it's there's this whole world that I want to ask you about. But important thing, we've talked for 25 minutes or so. How can people get this? How can people support you? What's the best thing for you? Yeah.
yeah, so Godslave is available online, the whole archive, free to read. It is at godslavecomic.com. From there, there are links to a newsletter where you can find updates. There's a link to my Patreon if you want to support the comic in small ways every month. And there's also a link to the store with the first volume and prints as well.
Perfect. And as for me personally, roughly when do you believe two would be in print?
So I am currently navigating printing quotes for volume
Ooh.
two.
Oh, you're that far? Oh, awesome.
Yeah. It hasn't been super fun because it is post worldwide paper shortage and huge inflation, and so
Mm-hmm.
printing quotes are very different. Now, on top of that, book two will be almost twice the size of book one.
Woo!
I got really away from myself in terms of the chapter and page counts. But yeah, so book one's huge. Book two is gonna be massive.
Wow. Okay, I look forward to that. That's awesome. I hope that navigating printing ends easy for you. I know that between, you know, the quote and, oh, I want this type of paper, this poundage, this print, this gloss, or whatever. I know when the actual end product comes out from the print, sometimes it's not perfect, and they gotta. I hope it goes easy for you.
I
I really do.
appreciate it.
uh, so, like you said, people can read the book. It's godslavecomic.com, correct?
Yes.
And it's all out there, totally free. They can support your Patreon. They can access your store and get the book. When people support your Patreon, I guess what would be the lowest level of it, and what does that get them?
Sure. So there are a couple different tiers. The first tier, which is like $2 a month, it is early updates. And so they get to read the pages first. I'm about 4 to 5 pages ahead of what's live on the site.
Oh.
They also get to vote on monthly illustrations. And so I'll do a different illustration every month. They get to vote on the subject. And it can be anything from which character would you like to see versus what kind of alternate universe, like God, would you like to see Edith serve in the comic? So that is the first tier. The second tier, which is just at like $5 a month, is spoilers. And so they get to see the comic and the pages as they're being made. So they get to see some of the scripts, they get to see the sketches, they get to see, what works and what doesn't. And then $10 a month is a cameo tier. And so if you subscribe to that, you get all of that I just mentioned. And also for like background characters or, blacksmiths and such, you can get featured in the comic. And then there is the physical merch tier, and then there's the commission tier. The physical merch tier, you get the print that I mentioned that patrons get to vote on. You get that every month.
That's cool.
Sometimes I will add on extras, like I made a book report zine for TCAF that was just all about Hathor, and so I included that for that month because I made it. And yeah, it varies. And then the last tier, the commission tier, is $20 a month, and you subscribe to that for 3 months, and then you get a original commission. And that could be anything from someone in the comic to their character or fan art.
So for $60, basically, you get access. Well, to be clear, you get access to everything you've mentioned so far. So early access to the pages as they're done, prints, all this cool stuff. Plus, you get a custom commission.
Yes, I have one like super fan who's been supporting since the very beginning. And
right
what
on.
she does is that she basically just waits it out where it's like $20 a month, and she'll wait until it's at $120, and then she gets 2 characters. And so the last thing, yeah, and so she just gets like couples commissions with her reward.
That's really cool. I
It's
like
it's
that.
been a really great way to interact with the audience and for the people who actually want to, like, who are, it's great to build an audience, but it's also great to like have extremely accessible and then ways to like really support the comic.
Yeah, exactly. Like I find Patreon to be such an amazing platform for stuff like that because you're providing a lot of value as far as I'm concerned, and the folks out there don't have to contribute that much, like in scale. Like I appreciate $20 a month for some people can be definitely a lot. I've been there myself,
Oh
but
yeah.
overall, given what you're getting, like if I went to Comic-Con and was like, hey, can I get a commission? Even like a lot of the local artists, it's going to be, 40, 50, $60 to start and then go up. Whereas you're offering that, which is amazing. And kudos to the person who's been with you since the beginning.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful where especially like doing something like a webcomic that is so very much my taste and what I love doing. And then when you're that unabashed about just what you love, people respond to that, I find, and then you just interact with people who love what you love. And that's been really wonderful, self-publishing and getting to do this.
Yeah, then I guess that's a perfect way to go into the next question that I wanted, which was, as someone who doesn't do a lot of webcomics myself, I guess, can you explain for me and the folks out there, um, what are some of like the big difference between regular comics and webcomics? What is the scene of webcomics like? Like, what's the community like? Um, and I guess maybe give a couple recommendations for webcomics you think people should check out.
Sure. I think the biggest thing to understand, to me, like webcomics is if you're going to self-publish, that's what you should do. It's webcomics. And what's great about this scene is that, uh, you know, with traditional publishing, you have an editor or you have an art director deciding what the market will like, deciding if there is an audience for the book. And based on their experience or their worldview, they decide this doesn't have an audience or this does have an audience. But
Mm,
what's great with webcomics, because it's so accessible, all you really need is an internet connection to find it. The market decides if there is a market for it. The audience
mm,
gets to decide if there is an audience for it. And so there are so many things that would normally never have gotten to see the light of day, but because webcomics are so accessible, they're available for free. Quote unquote, anyone can find them and read them. They're able to build this like small cottage industry that is absolutely livable and gets them some form of income. Whereas, like if they'd gone the traditional publishing route, they might not have ever been able to find that. And what was great was, when webcomics started to build up and they started to build this community and a business model started to form, I feel like that's where you really saw queer comics. That's where you saw
mm-hmm.
representation. A lot of women gravitated to webcomics. And uh, you got to see all of these people who maybe didn't find themselves in comics at large, but were able to find themselves in webcomics. And I think that did a lot for the industry because now, it's not where it should be, but it's a lot easier to find, traditional comic publishing with more representation, with
Yeah.
different kinds of storylines. And I think webcomics really were able to show the industry, oh, there is an audience for this. And so I think it's really wonderful what it was able to do for publishing itself. But also, I think webcomics is like still its own very beautiful, like great thing. As far as recommendations, the quality level for webcomics has also skyrocketed. Uh, Webtoons is the big platform for
Mm-hmm.
webcomics. Their Webtoons has its own originals line, and so
Oh.
that's a line of webcomics where they have like passed a certain barrier for entry. Um, and I read a really good one, Yuna and Kawa-chan, which
Okay.
is about these two characters going through this like monster apocalypse Japan, but one of
Oh.
them is kind of when the monsters first attacked, hid inside of this mascot costume and just only feels safe in the mascot costume. So it's just this girl and this like giant bunny mascot going through the apocalypse. Um, There's also Barbarous, which is done by Yuko Ota, and I'm going to butcher his name, unfortunately, but I know his first name is Ananth, and is, if you're into magic and monster fights, but also monster boyfriends, Barbarous is a really gorgeous comic. Yuko Ota, I adore her work, and so that's like a big one for me, and those would be like two big recommendations.
Perfect. And I don't know where, but when you said Barbarous, my brain was like, you know this. You've seen this thing, Konrad. And I'm like, yeah, that's come up somewhere else before for me. So thank you. I will be sure to have links down below for folks to check those out too. I guess another question I have is, a lot of the people that I have interviewed, they typically go the Kickstarter route, just because they want to make a physical print comic. So they write it, and then they'll pay an artist to draw it, or vice versa. An artist will have a great style and an idea, get a writer, they'll hash it all out, and then it gets created, and then they'll go to Kickstarter to be able to do publishing, shipping, make prints and posters and all that stuff, and then get their work out. Given that Webtoons just sort of side dresses that, I guess I wanted to ask, do you find a lot of people that make webcomics do Patreon as well? Is it 50-50 split? Is it, whoever, like, is it a lot of people doing it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the thing to understand is that when webcomics started, internet ads were still a thing, and not everyone and their dog had ad block. And so when webcomics first started, their way of monetizing the comic was just to put ads on the website, and
Side banners, yeah.
exactly, the leaderboard. And so the goal was, you drive them to the website as often as possible, you update the comic, you put a blog post, you just get them, you get the clicks, you get the impressions. But then ad block came along, and I think also like Google AdSense changed some of its rules about like image hosting. And so suddenly, what was, an extremely reliable income every month died out. But then crowdfunding kind of came to fill in that hole with things like Patreon and Kickstarter. And so you had this thing with micropayments, but you could build the audience on your website. And then for those of them that wanted to support the comic with either some extra content or early content at a very like accessible prices, Patreon became very attractive. And so it's kind of the new model for webcomics, where like you build the audience and then you point them to the micropayments.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how similar that shift is from ad revenue to Patreon, and like in my brain, TV with advertisements and Netflix.
Right.
That's just fascinating. Yeah. Bear with me.
Sure.
I just want to
I'm
grab.
gonna add my light here really quick.
For sure, no worries. Oh, perfect. Next question. So on your website, you've got across the top, you've got Godslave, and then there are 4 other titles. Takeoff being the 4th one, which is your other book that you've created, correct?
Yes. Takeoff was my first webcomic. It's the comic that I did like straight out of art school. I was already like in love with webcomics as I was coming out of school, but then my scripting teacher came up to me at the Fan Expo following graduation, and essentially dared me to start a webcomic. And I, being of the personality of not wanting to disappoint people, especially someone I respect, I was like, okay. And so 2 months later, by hook or crook, I started a webcomic and basically taught myself how I make comics with it.
Interesting. Actually, you know what? Then, like you said, how you make comics. Oh, so many questions. I guess The obvious one that I'll lead in, because you had your professor come up and dare you to do this. What is the difference, you would say, for folks that are currently going to art school, whether it's OCAD here in Toronto or many of the other programs that are out there? What would you say is the difference between how art teachers or art professors, or typically I think it'd actually be a design professor, would teach about making comics compared to actually doing it? What's the difference there, or is there one?
There's a huge difference. Well, here's the thing: is like you can only teach so much about like the tools available or the theory or the practice of it, but it is so much different actually making pages on a consistent basis. I think one of the best ways I heard it put was making like planning a comic versus making a comic is like trying to build a house in a tornado. uh, there's it's especially like coming from school, where you're in a classroom, you have your teacher, you have your deadline, you have the homework, you have a school, and you have the desk where you work, you have your allotted time for when you're supposed to work, versus making it at home by yourself to nobody at first, where the Xbox is in the same room, feels very different. And I think that throws a lot of people off when they first get into it, because you are solely responsible for the creation of that project, especially self-publishing.
How do you What would you recommend is the best method for keeping yourself accountable, for shutting up and getting to work? How do you do that for yourself?
I think small projects. I think starting something small and finishing it it's really underestimated. The finishing something feels so good and so empowering. And so don't be me and start a 300-page webcomic right out of school. Don't do that. Do something small, like a 3-page comic, and just get used to like hitting a routine of either you go to your day job and then you come home and then you work on it, or on your day off, you sit with your computer, you have your coffee, and then you start the comic. That's it sounds so simple, but it's really so hard to just like keep a routine, start small, and then build from there. Because that already is, from what I've seen from like young creators and other comic students, that is Herculean. Or the people who and now I'm gonna shit talk them, like the people who just get lost in character designs. It's like,
Ah,
this is my character, and these are like the drawings I did with them. And it's like, but just start the comic.
yeah. All of that designing is great and wonderful, and you're clearly having a very good time, but no one else knows about them right now. So
Yeah.
just put them on a page.
And so just start small and then go from there, and just build that routine of doing that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or whatever is like a consistent workable schedule.
I like it. Thank you for sharing that, Megan. That's awesome.
No problem.
Then I guess my other question is about your style. So one thing I noticed when I was reading your book is almost, is this spoilery? No, it's early in the book. I think we're okay. Actually, you know what? We'll go. Perfect example. Okay, cool. So we've got the start of a fight scene. We've got some massive swords coming out, people getting destroyed. But the artwork itself, a lot of your lines are very soft, very curved. Even like the sword itself has a lot of curves to it. So it feels, I don't have a good way to put it, squishy. So like you have a couple of shots where Megan, or not, you're Megan, where she's gotten back home, she's, passed out because she's tired, and like herself, her crinkled clothes, the bed, it all looks very soft, and I find your art has that quality to it. So yeah, how did you, between, I'm assuming you like to draw probably before high school or in high school, art school, and now for a decade, you've done comics. How did you arrive at the style you have now? And I guess it's a fun tidbit question. When you see like early pages like this, do you cringe at how different it is now?
Yes, in fact, even though you were saying like, well, this is spoilery, I'm like, that's fine. Go to a later page, please. um, no, I mean, style itself is, I feel like people, artists especially, get so wrapped up in like, I think like early artists get really wrapped up in like, what kind of style am I going to draw in, or how do I achieve a style? And I think style is just an amalgam of things you take in and things you like. And so I've mentioned I'm a huge weeb and I love manga. I especially loved shonen manga growing up. So that's a lot of like Shaman King, Naruto, Bleach. I was also like, I was into animation, and I especially loved like the Warner Brothers superhero cartoons, like Legion of
Oh,
Superheroes, Justice League. And so some of that like cartooning is kind of in there. And so it's really just an amalgam of those things. And as you can probably see, like I'm not super drawn to like overly rendered comics, or like like really
mhm.
high realism comics. Um, so that's be like more adult superheroes, yeah, like
Yeah,
Batman, or like the Jim Lee style is not quite for me. Um, yeah, it's
yeah.
also very like colorful.
Emotive
And
too, highly.
yes, oh yes, I'm big on faces, which again, that comes from manga. That comes from especially like girls manga, really big expressions and emotional like character drama faces.
Yeah.
And so I would say like it's an amalgam of all those things I kind of took in growing up and wanted to have it in my work. I wanted to have that like shonen action comics, and I wanted to have kind of the simplicity of like animated superhero stuff. Now I'm getting into stuff like Dan Mora, who does
Mm.
so gorgeous. So he's more rendered than what I typically do, but I'm trying to like incorporate a little bit more of that, especially into my action scenes, because his stuff is rendered, but it's still really dynamic. Like there's still a lot of
Highly.
impact. There aren't a lot of lines getting in the way of what you're looking at. And so especially his creature design. I'm currently reading, I actually have it here. I've been looking at it off camera. Um, is Once in Future.
Oh,
I adore this series. And so I'm reading that. I've got Mob Psycho here that I'm just catching up on picking up the volumes. I've also got Chris Samnee, so his middle grade
oh.
book Jonah. You can see I just took a trip to BMV, which is the secondhand store. But Jonah, his stuff is, I mean, you say like soft or like juicy. This stuff is like it's so soft. It's so much cartooning going
Yeah.
on, and like that big chunky inks that I really like. And so that's something I'm like high rendered stuff like Dan Moore. I'm trying to like slowly incorporate a bit more, but still focusing on like big shapes and dynamic action.
Oh, big time. Yeah, like for me personally, like I'm a big Christmas fan. I love Christmas.
I'm a
Not like the
Christmas
religious aspect.
fiend.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And for me, like my intro to Dan Mora was through Grant Morrison and Dan Mora's Klaus or Claus. And I fell in love with his work like that. It was like, oh, okay. It had a little bit of the Jim Lee super rendering, but it was really, like you said, dynamic, and it's just a cool drawing to look at. Mora's work on Power Rangers too, really awesome
His
stuff.
Ninja Turtles are so
Oh,
good.
so good. So yeah, folks out there, just Google Dan Mora Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers. Just Google Dan Mora and
Mhm.
go. So good. Um, so we've talked a ton about your comic. So I just want to summarize really quickly. So people can go to either godslavecomic.com to read Godslave in its entirety of what's released so far for free. They can support you on your Patreon. which is extremely affordable. And for a mere $20 a month, they can get commissions and prints and all this wonderful things. They can also go to Meaghan. I believe it's just meaghancarter.com, correct?
It's megacarter.com.
Mega Carter, thank you. Megacarter.com, and they can basically have access to all of that, plus your other works that you've done, your other books that you've worked on, either alone or with someone else. So we're at the last little bit of the interview, and well, we've talked a lot about comics, and you're very emotive, so I feel like people have got to know you. I like to ask some other stuff about you.
Yeah.
So often I find people who read comics and specifically make comics tend to be collectors and creators themselves. While you may have a very large collection of comics and figures and all these other things, what do you feel is the centerpiece? What is the thing that if someone was like, what's the coolest thing you own? Maybe not the most expensive, maybe not the rarest, but what's the thing that when you see it, you're like, yeah.
So this is actually very timely. My husband and I took a trip to Chinatown in Toronto, and we went to Anime Extreme. And we got in on their Boxing Day sale. So he's just getting into Transformers.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And so he was looking at the Transformers toys, and I am big into Metabots. And so I picked up a figure kit for this character who in the show, at least in the dub, was called Rox, like Roks. Apparently in Japanese, he's called Dorcas. Yeah, Dorcus, which I'm sure in Japanese, Dorukasu sounds much cooler.
Than Dorcas.
But yeah, I basically spent my Saturday just putting this guy together. This is my first figure kit that I've done.
Oh, no way. Okay.
And I also I love Metabots. Like shonen anime, I loved Metabots growing up. And not so much supernatural partnerships, but human, non-human partnerships. Metabots absolutely satisfies that. And
Such
so
a good show.
yeah, and so I would say this is the crown right now, or at least this is what I love looking at right now.
That is so cool. I absolutely remember loving Metabots. I mean, obviously Metabee being the main Metabot that you meet, super cool. But yeah, the design work on that show, on how different they all were, and how they were practical to the world. Because a lot of the times you'll see in shows where I think Cardcaptor comes to mind, where clearly all the Clow cards were just causing terror, right? But all the Metabots pretty well had almost jobs to do. Minus Metabee, I guess he was just kind of hanging out. And the I can't remember their names, but the three bullies there, they had their three Metabots that were pretty much just bullies, but everyone else was there was a nurse one, there's a construction Metabot. Good show. Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool.
Not at all. I'm always happy to remind people remember Metabots?
Oh yeah, that was honestly top tier. The theme song for that, perfect.
Yes.
To my knowledge, only ever the original anime came out, right? Or have they made a more recent version?
As far as I know, there was only there was 3 seasons. There was 3 seasons, and there was a comic which I've only had a friend send me a copy from overseas that I've been able to find. But yeah, as far as I know, if there's more stuff, God, I want to hop on that. But right now, I'm just I'm now keeping an eye on what other little boys can I bring home?
Oh yeah. I think I would go after personally. I think it was called Sparkcat.
Peppercat.
Peppercat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful design on that creature. That's so cool. I guess another question I'd like to ask is, obviously you're a big fan of anime. We'll do it both. What anime would you recommend, and what manga or manga would you recommend people check out?
Okay. So right now I'm watching Mob Psycho, which I think is a really wonderful anime. It is essentially about a 12-year-old boy who is the greatest uh, psychic telekinetic who's ever lived. He's so powerful, and nobody even comes close. But when the story begins, he's just this 12-year-old kind of loser. He's not very smart, and he's not very strong, and he's not very charismatic. And so, even though he's the strongest telekinetic who's ever lived, the story focuses on him trying to be a better person and finding other
Oh.
value in himself other than his powers. And he has
Huh.
a part-time job working for this shyster named Reagan, who pretends to be the greatest psychic and telekinetic in the world.
Huh.
And he's acting as Mob's like teacher, like, oh, I'm your master. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know. But the series is just like really charming and really earnest about him trying to be a better person, while also like interacting with other extremely strong telekinetics and psychics who are just lambasted by the fact that he's so strong, but he just wants to get muscles.
That sounds really good. I've had people be like, "Oh, Konrad, you gotta watch this show. It's really cool." And I'm like, "All right, what's it about?" And I've had some pretty good explanations, but I'm like, it just sounds like an overpowered protagonist again. That explanation though, I like that. So it's not that he's trying to be like a psychic. He just wants to be like a normal, valuable person.
Yeah. Do you know One Punch Man?
Oh yeah,
Same writer. Which you can kind
fascinating.
of see like the through lines there of like One Punch Man obviously is about like the strongest superhero, and now he has to deal with the idea that there is no challenge left for him whatsoever. And Mob Psycho kind of follows that, but it's more at this very vulnerable stage of this boy's life,
Huh.
where he's just trying to be a good person.
I dig it. That is so cool.
Um, so anime, and I mean Bones, who did the first season of One Punch, is handled all of Mob, so it's gorgeous. They really push the envelope in terms of the animation there. I highly recommend that. In terms of manga, so right now, I've been going back to, we're dealing with a lot of like renovation in our house, which has been very frustrating. And so I've been going to a lot of like comfort manga.
Nice.
And there's
Okay.
this one I really love called, it's Girls High School Nozaki-kun. It's
Okay.
about this. It's basically about like a series of romantic misunderstandings. It's a comedy. It's hilarious, but it's about this male high school kid who draws girls manga in
Okay.
secret, but who is an absolute dunce when it actually comes to romance. It's got wonderful side characters. Again, it's kind of like these. It started as a web comic, and so it's these kind of gag-a-day strips, but it's hilarious. It's heartwarming. I and the art is also like really really pretty and really emotive as well. Really great
Mhm.
faces and emotions. So that's one I've been going back to. So it's Girls High School Nozaki-kun.
Perfect. I'll For everything we've talked about, I'm gonna have images come up. I'll have links to chapters, Indigo, or if it's an online thing, I'll link there so people will be able to find all this stuff, which is awesome. Thank you for sharing.
No
Um,
problem. I'm now feel like silly doing like these big gestures of like
oh,
it's like
not at
this
all.
and like this.
Not at all. It's awesome. Um, I guess I don't want to keep you long because we're at the hour, and I think the last I'll end on my last two questions. Um, so I hope this one's easy. Who do you think I should interview next?
Oh, let's see. Um, have you spoken with Alison O'Toole?
I haven't. I've actually met Allison at Sidekick Comics once or twice. I've interviewed people who have worked with Allison. I've never actually done this with Allison yet, so I will reach out.
Yeah, Allison's wonderful. She's extremely well spoken, and she always like really knows what she's talking about, and she delivers it in a really confident way. But like on top of that, for those who don't know, she is a working editor. She's been working with Jason Lowe for years. She currently works with Chip Zdarsky and freelance edits for a couple publishers as well. She's a great mind when it comes to comics and comics writing and comics draftsmanship. What I loved was that when I first met her, she was well versed with like writing and story and structure, but she then took the time as she was interacting with me and other artists to learn about comics draftsmanship and like visual
Oh.
storytelling. And I find that like some editors will stick to one or the other, but she really made a point of, you know, not mastering, but like making sure that she was well versed with both wheelhouses. And I think she's just wonderful to talk to, extremely charming.
Awesome. I mean, I definitely the few times I've interacted with her, like I said, at Sidekick Comics there in Leslieville, yeah, she's super sweet person. Yeah, definitely has that feeling of I don't want to say authority, but that extreme confidence that comes in, like she knows her shit.
Exactly,
Like
100%.
that's it.
If I were to
Um,
describe Allison, she knows her shit.
yeah. And yeah, it's so cool because actually, I got to interview why am I losing his name? He created the Pitiful Human Lizard.
Jason Lowe.
Jason Lowe, thank you. I actually interviewed him at Toronto Comic Con last year. I would love to interview Zdarsky. But yeah, I've definitely noticed the books Allison is working on have gone more and more mainstream.
Mm.
Because I've kind of like in the back of my mind, I think even myself, I'm like, I should interview this person. And I've kind of noticed that growth, and it's like that's really cool.
I think
Yeah.
it is in part like it is her own growth, but I think it's also it's the industry recognizing her hard work and her skills.
Beautiful. Well, I'll see what I can do about interviewing Allison. Thank you for the suggestion. My last question, I look forward to this one is, what do you think people should know?
Uh, what should they know? They should know that you've been watching Wednesday Night Review.
Thank
uh,
you.
that's all I've got on me. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. They should know for 2023. They should know kindness and patience and understanding.
I love it. Thank you. Kindness, patience, understanding. I think we all could use a lot of that, especially for this year.
Yeah,
Well then, absolutely, Meaghan. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show tonight.
I really appreciate you having me and letting me just go on and go off.
Anytime. You know what? When something big goes on, let me know. I'll be happy to have you back on. You're really fun to speak with. And for the folks out there in YouTube land, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think of Meaghan. And again, check out all the links down below because you're going to be able to get all sorts of cool stuff, including reading the whole series of Godslave for free if you want. We'll see you next time.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it. True believer, not lying. Always up for an awesome summer crossover.